welcome. Thank you for attending this morning. It's great to see a large number of you here and a large number of familiar faces, I think, in the audience. So thank you for that. And thanks to Lee and to BOHS for organising and hosting us. And of course to Chris for coming to share his knowledge with us. So quickly, I just thought I'd give an introduction to who we are, if you're not aware of the UK Hearing Conservation Association. So we were set up just over 5 years ago now, and it was really based on, if I'm honest, the kind of frustrations of a number of us professionals and experts and passionate advocates for controlling noise and conserving hearing, who'd been knocking around for quite some time on this topic and felt it really wasn't getting the attention it needed, and being part of various groups that were then disbanded. And at the time, we just progressed quite a bit of work with an NHS action group on hearing, which again was underfunded and undermined and kind of collapsed. So we all got together, as I said, probably about 6 years ago now, and said, look, what are we going to do about this? We either kind of carry on in our individual silos and try and keep, banging the drum, or we actually, obviously a very quiet drum, or we get together and we collaborate and we pull our resources and our passion into a common umbrella. We did that, and we set up the UK Hearing Conservation Association. I say that was about 20 of us at the time who come together to do this. So really to be a kind of a cross-disciplinary, a multidisciplinary group from various backgrounds with various different perspectives on noise and hearing conservation, to kind of pull together, produce independent, credible, evidence-based resources for people, and really to try and kind of break down those barriers, focused on prevention and this holistic look at noise as well, and exposures across the life cycle, and see what we could do to try and make a difference. So today's session really is a teaser, if you like, to our upcoming Hearing Conservation Conference, Listen Up, which we've been running now for the past, I think this is our 3rd year, although we did do one when I was at HSE quite a while ago. So if you like what you hear, or if you're interested in hearing conservation, please do join us if you can on the 5th of November. And there's a QR code there to get a direct link to sign up to that. And I'll put that up again at the end. But as I say, if you're interested, and I'll give you a sneak peek of the programme as well. So I don't want to spend too long, but I thought I'd sort of provide a bit of context about what we've been doing, and why we're, feel that there's maybe a shift and a movement in this area. And I think, not just the fact that HSE are taking an interest, but looking at the number of people we've had sign up to these kind of events and conferences over the past few years demonstrates that, there's a significant interest in the topic. But generally, there's been the question of, well, is noise still a problem? Surely, heavy industry, a lot of the typically traditional trades, where we had very high noise exposures in the workplace, have gone now. A lot of that heavy industry doesn't exist like it used to. And a recent report from the HSE's Workplace Health Expert Committee, the WEC group, published a report, I think, probably 18 months or so ago. And in that report, although they did recognise that there's probably not enough evidence, statistics and insights to give us a clear view of noise exposure profile in the UK, or the impact that's having on hearing and health, they generally assumed that, in their opinion, noisy industry had reduced, and there's a lot more better hearing protection out there. So we kind of get the feeling that probably things are okay or improving. However, what they didn't, I don't think, recognise or appreciate more fully is the kind of wider context of the fact that listening habits and exposure to sound in our lives has significantly changed. While we've had a decline in heavy industry, we've certainly seen a huge upturn in listening habits and consumption of kind of audible content. And you only have to walk down the street, or go on any public transport to see most people plugged in to some kind of content, and that can be pretty commonplace across the day and the evening. People even listen listening to sound to fall asleep. And I think another issue to kind of raise, and again just put out there for context, a lot of our attitudes towards hearing loss have been based in the fact that, well, we all go deaf with age and eventually we'll all lose our hearing. It's called presbyacusis and it's age-related hearing loss, and it's something we all have to put up with. But actually, if I just put out the challenge that there's no such thing as age-related hearing loss, it's all noise and sound related. So presbyacusis is sound and noise related hearing loss. It's just that does accumulate over our age. Therefore, the older we get, the more exposure we've had. So actually, age related hearing loss is preventable. So we have an opportunity to kind of debug some of these myths and say, just because we get older, we don't have to lose our health and find this as an inevitability. There's also been, and I'm sure you're all very well aware of the link that's been shown, or the causal pathway between noise exposure and early onset of dementia, and that hearing loss has been identified as the number one modifiable factor. So the one thing we can impact on, the one thing we can influence to reduce our likelihood of dementia in future life. So knowing all these things, knowing and understanding the kind of wider health impact that hearing loss can have, really should be, focusing our attention on doing more. And some resources we produced in the UKHCA on the right hand side of the screen was to show what the hierarchy of control for noise would look like, because we really want to move people away from this over reliance on hearing protection, which for any other exposure we would not tolerate. And yet for noise, we just say, well, as long as we've given them hearing protection, we've kind of done the job. So we need to really rigorously challenge ourselves in this area. And we are the Hearing Conservation Association, and a lot of people say to us, well, what is a hearing conservation program? What would it look like? And simply put, as I'm sure most of you in this audience would know, we want to look at eliminating or reducing the noise at source. We want to improve our control approach rather than reliance on hearing protection. We need better assurances that those controls are working. So we need to think about exposure monitoring. It's not just a blanket. We do a noise survey every year and we do nothing about it. We need to more critically look at our health surveillance approach and how that's supporting us in understanding exposures and where things are working and where things aren't. I think we need to be more honest about exposure beyond the workplace, and also the important issue of people using headphones and personal listening devices in the workplace. So some people use headphones for work, and I think that's an misunderstood or not fully evaluated exposure where people use headphones for work. But you also have people who come into workplace and listen to their own content in the workplace. And again, we're not sure about the kind of legal responsibilities there, but you can imagine if somebody did try to bring a claim against an employer and they'd also been listening to their personal content, how would you understand that level of exposure and what it was doing to the person? And not just maybe focus on hearing loss, as say the wider health impact on cardiovascular systems related to stress. We don't really understand tinnitus and the scale and the impact of tinnitus on people exposed to noise, and obviously this kind of cognitive impact on people's social interaction and stress, depression, and as I say, that kind of early onset of affecting cognitive function. So, I'm going to hand over to Chris in a minute, but, this report, from HSE, which is now 15 years old, really did set the evidence base, if you like, for saying, well, if you're an employer and you're relying on hearing protection to solve your noise exposure problems, it doesn't work. And the evidence is there. And it's quite clear that, we're not protecting people by just giving out hearing protection. So nothing's been done. They just take away our radios and give us hearing protection or earplugs. All of this is still completely valid 15 years on. So we really do need to do more, focus more. And I really do sense the eternal optimist in me anyway. But, as I say, the fact that in over 20 years, the HSE are now investing heavily and focusing heavily on this as a topic. The last time they did this was when the directive was transposed into the GB regulations. So it took them quite a bit of time to sort of go back to this. So it's brilliant to see the interest and what that's driving in the employers and the professionals supporting us in this field. So as I say, you will hear more back from Chris in a second. Just to highlight that we do have lots of hopefully useful resources on our website. There's some stuff on fit testing, what it is. So if you are relying on hearing protection, making sure it does fit and it's appropriate and suitable for the individuals that are using it. Loads of posters there on fit checking. So you'll all be familiar as hygienists with these principles, and some posters for employers and individuals, for outside of work. A sneak peek there. I'll just leave that up for a second on our programme for the conference coming up in November. So Chris will be joining us again. And if you think you've heard everything today, well, this is only a little sneak preview. You will only get the full insights into the HSE's inspection programme outputs on the 5th of November. Chris has promised me. So although you get some insights here, if you want to really get the full insights from the enforcement activity, do join us then when we'll focus more on what's been found on hearing protection and the upcoming work plan for HSE. But yeah, there's a quick look at our contact information. If you'd like to find out more about what we do at the Hearing Conservation Association, get some of our resources, join us at the conference. And at that point, I shall stop sharing and hand over to Chris, who we're really grateful is joining us today. HSE's Noise and Vibration Specialist Inspector for over 10 years now, Chris, is it?
Yeah, getting close to that, yeah.
Close to 10 years. So I don't think you need any other introduction. I'm sure most people on the call will know you well. So I'll hand over to you now, Chris, to talk about some outcomes from the woodworking pilot, maybe?
Yeah, and a few other things. So hopefully can you see the slides clear?
Yeah, we've got them.
Okay, well, I'll start off by thanking you for making me feel even older than I already feel most mornings by saying I've been doing this for 10 years. So HSE is doing a work noise enforcement programme. Some of you are probably aware of that. We're doing targeted inspection of noise, and what I'm going to tell you today is what we've found. Now, just to run through what we've done previously, we actually did a result. We've got results from the trial inspections that we did on woodworking. So we looked at woodworking as a pilot scheme to see whether or not it was worth our while going out and doing a full inspection programme on noise. So I'm going to show you some of the results from that. I'm going to tell you some of the early wins that we've got from these across industry or all industry inspection programme that we're running. That's currently ongoing, and it's going to run at least until April. Hopefully I'll have some more news on what will be happening in subsequent years at the UK Hearing Conservation meeting in Birmingham, but I can't say too much about that just now because decisions are still being made. And then the last thing that I'm going to go through is what the current and future engagement action is for HSE. So if any of you are involved in writing or producing third-party noise reports, workplace noise reports for companies, then this is probably of interest to you. So what were the results from these inspection programs? We went out and did woodworking sites. We looked at a small number, for us, a small number of woodworking sites to see what the level of control was with regards to workplace noise. What we found was that about 40% of the sites that we went to, woodworking only, were in some level of non-compliance with the regulations. Now, some of that was NOx, so some of it was also actual improvement notices. Now, we kind of hope that people are compliant with the regulations. That's the expectation, the underlying expectation. And we weren't sure whether noise was going to be a specific issue for this. So this is quite a significant hit rate for HSE when we're looking at this type of sites that we're going to. We can break that down into some of the findings that we had. We were specifically interested in a couple of things. One was some very specific noise control measures that could be taken by any workshop, but also how well they were managing their hearing protection. So slightly different here. In the previous slide, red was good and blue was bad. And now in this one, blue and grey are good, but red is bad. So we were seeing poor compliance rates on things like low noise saws and helical cutting plates and enclosures for CNC machines. I know this is getting into the world of esoteric language and woodworking. So just for you that might not know, that is what a helical cutting block looks like. It's the thing on the right-hand side at the top. We're also looking at combed feed-in trays for things like planers and finishers. That will reduce the noise that comes off of these types of machinery. We're looking to see these types of things being installed. Some equipment can have it done retrospectively without too much problems, others can't, but we're asking for that. We're also, I've got expectations around about enclosures for woodworking machinery, and as you probably know, any kind of issues with being able to fully enclose it are going to reduce the performance of it. So we're looking for instances where the plastic fingers are broken, and actually in this instance here, this thing here should actually have a feed-in tube, and that wasn't there. But coming back to the hearing protection issues that we looked at, we were interested to see how well they were being used. We're actually finding quite a substantial or decent level of control when it came to the condition of the hearing protection that was being used. And that may be the nature of the sites that we were going to. We also found that they were being worn correctly when they were being worn. And that was probably the key issue for us, was the wearing of it, that they had the hearing protection, it was in good condition, but they maybe weren't wearing it as much as we would hope. We're also interested in health surveillance. Now, health surveillance in the wider sense. So we looked at health surveillance across the board. So that's why these numbers are higher than just the wood noise inspections, because obviously some of the sites we went to, noise wasn't an issue. But health surveillance was certainly an issue across most of the woodworking sector. And concerningly, we were finding that about half of the sites that we visited, there was failings on health surveillance. So that's given us a steer on what to do for this wider inspection programme that's been running since April this year. We are running through a 4-phase programme. This is something that we've put forward to HSE that we want to do from the noise team and is taken on board. We're currently in phase 1, which is this broad approach. We're trying to find out where the noise issues are, and we're starting at the bottom of the hierarchy of control to see how well people are complying with the regulations. We're using this acronym CUF. I'll come on to that in a bit. But we're also looking at this stage, we're starting to look at third-party consultants. As we move through the phasing, we will focus down on industries, noise-heavy industries, and looking at control there. We'll focus on high-risk industries. We will be looking at health surveillance because of the issues that we've seen there in the previous slide. And then we will do a review. We will potentially go back and look at all the sites that we went to in phase 1 to see if we've got sustained compliance, have we seen a difference. Now, hopefully, some of you are aware that HSE is promoting the CUF acronym to help provide a simple message around hearing protection. This is the sort of thing that we were saying to duty holders, their employees. I was out yesterday talking to the Forestry Commission employees specifically about this type of thing. I'm guessing, or I'm hoping most of you know that at CUF, it's about checking your hearing protection, making sure that it's in good condition, that it's being used all the time, and I think that's going to be an ongoing focus for us, that it fits the ear, and that it's fit for purpose. They haven't just bought whatever happens to be at hand, that they've actually looked at the performance specification of it. So that's our plan, that's what we're phasing through. What are the early results that we're getting from all these industry inspections? Now, I'll be honest with you, I cannot give you all the information just now, and most of the information that those of you who are interested in hearing protection, that will be presented at the UK Hearing Conservation Association. So if this is interesting to you, then please come along to that. But that will be the first time that we'll present it. We'll hopefully have other opportunities to get that information out to you. But what's our initial findings? Well, the number of noise enforcement notices has trebled. We are doing, hopefully, I think that means, or I believe that means it's went up. There's 3 times as many improvement notices and knock letters going out. We compared what we're doing now to a 3-month period when we weren't looking specifically at noise, just dealing with it as a matter of evident concern. And because of the training that we've given our staff and the fact that they're now asking for it, we're getting 3 times as many instances where we're issuing enforcement on noise-related issues. Interestingly, the percentage of failure rates across industry is relatively similar to what we'd seen in the woodworking visit. So if you see there with the woodworking one, it's still round about that kind of 40% rate, with about 61% being kind of compliant, which again, we'd hope a lot of people are compliant. But we've consistently looked at health surveillance over the years as an issue for us. And the thing that's interesting to me is that noise is as big an issue in terms of non-compliance as health surveillance is, when we look at the overall numbers. Just kind of skipping on to that health surveillance data there. To be clear, the noise pie chart that you saw there doesn't include noise health surveillance. All health surveillance questions were lumped into the health surveillance failure rates for health surveillance across the board. But we can look at that and break that down by the individual health surveillance requirements. And so what are the types of health surveillance that employers are most likely to need? So these were the top answers. And as you can see, noise was the one that was most likely to be required. And remember again that we're not just looking at woodworking here, we're looking at a multitude of different types of sites. Now, I expect as the year goes on for this to be altered slightly, because we kind of work through different sectors as we go through the year. So we start off sometimes with construction and then move on to doing metal fabrication. But we're well enough into the year now to be relatively confident that these numbers or these percentages are going to be very, very stable. But certainly noise is about 30% of all the sites we're going to, where health surveillance is required. About 30 of them, they definitely need noise health surveillance. Are workers exposed above the upper action value? Well, the initial sort of breaking down of the information that we can do is break it up between fixed sites and construction sites. And we're finding that about 40% of the fixed work sites that we're going to, the workers are exposed above the upper action value. But on construction sites, it's down to about 11%. Now, that's very dependent on when the inspector went to site and what they saw when they went there. So the instruction that they've been given is, you look at noise when it's clearly going to be an issue. So obviously sometimes when you go to a construction site, you maybe go there at the phase where they're doing painting and decorating, and you would hope that isn't an issue for noise. And so there may be the reasoning behind that. But similarly, there's probably an expectation that whilst there is noise on construction sites, it's maybe above the lower exposure action value rather than just the upper exposure action value. Are employers with a noise problem using a third-party advisor? About 41% are. So we're finding quite a significant number of people using it. That's a good thing, I suppose, that they're getting advice where they feel that they're not competent. About 60% aren't, so they've got a noise problem, but they haven't went to a third-party advisor. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That may be a perfectly acceptable thing for them to do, but it's certainly indicative to HSE that if round about half of the work sites where they've got a noise problem are getting external advice rather than using their own internal advisors who may be absolutely competent to do it, we want to make sure that those people giving that advice are saying what HSE says, and then they know what HSE is looking for. One of the things that was very shocking to us, we asked whether the employers are checking the audibility when they issue workers with hearing protection. Now, this is a safety critical issue. What we're looking at here is you've been given ear muffs, earplugs. Can you still hear the fire alarm when you're wearing that? Can you still hear warning cries when you're wearing that? Can you still hear the alarms on the stop alarms on the machinery when you're wearing that? And only 5% of the sites that we went to are checking it. That's a very significant failing, and it's something that we are genuinely concerned about. So it's something that if you are involved in the assessment of workplace noise, we would really encourage you to start looking at that. Okay, so what about the percentage rates of enforcement? Now, this graph's a little bit misleading because, as I said before, the bottom line there, which is enforcement during the noise campaign, is actually 3 times the size of the enforcement when there isn't any noise campaign. But the takeaway from it is that, yes, we're seeing a lot more health surveillance, which you would expect because, if most of the health surveillance or a large chunk of the health surveillance that is required is for noise, then you would see that going up. We're happy that we're seeing a reduction in the amount of enforcement that we're given for risk assessments, because we're trying to move people away from risk assessments. We're trying to move them into control, and also for health surveillance as well. The big change for us is that we're now actually got a percentage in the enforcement on hearing protection. And actually even that number there, which looks quite small in comparison, but again, remember it's 3 times the size of what we were doing before. We went from 0 to about 7 or 8%. But some of those control enforcement notices actually were on hearing protection. It just depends on what decision the inspector made on site, whether he took them on the control regulations or on a specific hearing protection regulation, but in relation to the hearing protection that was issued. Right, so the last thing that we're looking at is what the current and future engagement is for HSE. So HSE wants to make it easier for duty holders and third-party consultants to know what to expect. That's what we've been trying to do over the last couple of years, even before we started the intervention programme. And we're working on a few things just now and ongoing. Some of you may have seen recently the Institute of Acoustics published an article by one of my colleagues, Rachel Van Besso, on consultants, and that's caused quite a bit of debate and discussion amongst that organisation, which is really encouraging for us. But we're collecting around about 30 unique workplace reports every month. That's looks like a low number in comparison to the number of sites we're going to, but I think that the key word here is unique. A lot of companies we go to, they may have a workplace noise report or a workplace noise provider that's covering 2 or 3 different areas or 2 or 3 different sites. So in terms of unique reports, we're getting about 30 a month, and we are looking at them. We're looking at them to see whether they're any good, and we're looking at them to see if there's any significant issues that we could potentially take enforcement on. What are we finding with those reports? Well, the typical concerns that there is no of us poor advice on hearing protection. We really do expect that to be something. If someone's charging you money to do a workplace noise report, then they probably should be giving you advice on whether or not you need hearing protection and what type of hearing protection. Some of them didn't identify all the highest noise activities. Quite a significant number of them, you know, if the thing wasn't being used on the day they decided to turn up, they just decided not to do measurements on it, which is again not great. We're seeing limited advice on site-specific noise controls, and that's really something that we want to see an increase on. If you look at that woodworking visits that we did, we were looking at specific controls that duty holders could and should be using, and that's the kind of thing that we would want to see replicated in third-party advice. The duty holder doesn't know what the report covers. They aren't sure whether what they've paid for is a full all singing, all dancing workplace noise report, or if it's just measure and declare. We found reports where there's measurements at one fixed point in the workplace, and that's used to define exposure. Now, there might be some instances where that is acceptable, but for large work sites, the idea of setting up a sound level meter on a tripod and letting it run all day and saying that's what the exposure action value is for people who work across a large area is not necessarily a very credible thing to do. We're also seeing reports that just repeat HSE guidance. That's not great. I mean, the idea that we've got individuals, companies paying money to get stuff that they could get for free, either in our guidance documents or on the website, is a pretty poor state of affairs, and really unhappy about the idea that people are paying money for information that they could have got that's already been paid for by the taxpayer. And then we're seeing some failures in measurement practice. So but our concern, or our potential concern around about consultants' works seems to have been to some extent verified. Now, it's not an entirely dark picture here. You know, there are a lot of good consultancy reports. We are seeing a lot of good stuff out there. But it's enough for us to say we really need to address this. And also, if roughly half of the sites that we're going to are reliant on this advice, then we want to be absolutely sure that the stuff that they're getting is of a good quality. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with these, because we have what we call an example report that is been given to BOHS and the Institute of Acoustics and the Association of Noise Consultants for use by their members, and also for publication on their websites if they want to. But you know, we have expectations around bare minimum baseline reports, intermediate reports, and comprehensible reports, and this is something that they've effectively agreed on as a group as the type of thing that we would hope to see. But also, we're now using this sort of information to feed into our enforcement processes. So we have recently just published on our own website. If you want to get it, I'm afraid you have to put a freedom of information request in. I would probably encourage somebody to do that. But if you want to have a look at what our enforcement guidance is for workplace noise, It now includes a section in it on consultants. Now, again, this is probably not the easiest thing to read, but essentially what we're looking for is any significant failings on workplace noise, so something which would actually put the duty holder in a position of risk. So, i.e., they used to wear hearing protection because they thought it was noisy. Someone came in, completely messed up the measurements, told them it wasn't noisy, even though it was. And now you've got people working in a high noise environment without hearing protection. That type of thing is of significant concern for us. We would look at that. If there's any immediate issues that we would need to take enforcement with the duty holder or advice to the duty holder, we do that first. We then go to that consultant, and we are not going to be gathering or taking enforcement off that one issue. We want to see whether there's a wider problem there. So we would be looking at what they are doing generally, if they've got more than one consultant, what they're up to, what their competencies are. And if it's a consistent problem across the multiple sites, then we would enforce in the same way that we would enforce on anybody. You know, we're looking at improvement notices, knock letters, and potentially even court cases. If it's an indication that this is a sort of one-off, we're having a bad day, that kind of thing, then we may, you know, take a softer approach, but we would certainly be telling the professional association that we weren't particularly happy with what they've been doing. And if this was, you know, not a significant issue, if these things really weren't that bad, but there was just a couple of minor concerns and we'd seen it worthy enough for us to go out and speak to that consultant, then we may give a verbal advice and sort of advise them to have a look at the information that we've already produced. So we will be presenting more results on enforcement and the use of hearing protection at the UK Hearing Conservation Conference. That's going to be on the 5th of November in Birmingham. I'd encourage anybody to come to that. But again, later on in the year, we'll try to put more information out, but that'll be the first time that we'll give you information. I'm just going to end off here with a wee slide with my contact details, because I know it's not easy to get a hold of people at HSE. And the key thing as well is just to let you know that we really need support from people like yourself in order for us, HSE, to get our message out. That's why we're doing these types of talks. I'm not in the business of trying to issue people with fines or take them to court because they've made their employees ill. I am in the business of trying to stop people from getting ill, and the only way that I can do that is if I get your help and support. So I'll hand you back now to Lee. Thank you.
I'm afraid it's probably me, Chris. But
sorry.
Brilliant, really interesting stuff there. Loads of kind of juicy bits of information. I'll just wait for people to maybe put some questions to you in the chat box and pick up on some of the things you said. A couple of things I made a note on. Interesting that nearly half the sites that you've looked at were using a consultant, specialist advisor on noise. I think it is generally a topic where people do seek out consultancy, third-party support, but yet maybe they're not getting the advice or the insights they need to do what they should be doing. And the audibility one is a big issue, as you highlighted. I think, again, working on construction, I'm pretty certain there will be a number of fatality cases on sites where people don't hear vehicles, in particular, machinery, mobile machinery approaching them and results in significant or fatal accidents. I don't think we've got good statistics on that, but it's certainly something anecdotally that we knew about in the construction sector.
Yeah, I think this, as you say, the anecdotal evidence of it. The thing that we found a lot with fatalities and injuries caused by people not being able to hear things is that the hearing issue is one of the issues in the mix. You know, it's not necessarily the key reason why something's went wrong, but it's certainly one of the, you know, on that list of things, those critical path of things that happened that contribute to it. And I'd really like to take it out, be it purely for if for no other reason, but personal reasons. It's not a very pleasant experience going out and dealing with fatalities and going to coroner's courts and giving evidence about some poor soul that's been injured or even was killed at work because they didn't hear either an instruction, a work instruction, or they didn't hear a warning signal because their hearing protection was over specified.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well that, I mean, I'll put this 2 year, I think there's been a bit of criticism of HSE's inspection programme and focusing on hearing protection initially. And when we talk about, hearing protection is the bottom of the hierarchy, but here's HSE coming out and looking at hearing protection. And I noticed in some of these statistics that you put on that, we're looking less at risk assessments and expecting more on control, which is a good thing. But obviously there's still also that people do respond to what the HSE look at. And if the HSE inspectors initially go in and say, can we see your risk assessment? The first thing they're going to make sure they've got is, well, we've got a risk assessment. If HSE are coming in to look at hearing protection, and an instinct will be, oh gosh, we better make sure we've got hearing protection. So I don't know if you've got any sort of insight into how that's affecting behaviours in duty holders.
I'm completely, accepting of the fact that, it doesn't look great that we're starting at the hearing protection end of things. If normally when I'm doing talks on workplace noise, I'll say, start at the top of the hierarchy and work your way down. But, I was looking at the 1972 guidance document that HSE put out, and in there it says in there from 1972, so bear in mind that you'd have to be 68 years old or older to have been working when this thing wasn't in effect. But it says in there that hearing protection should be a temporary measure while you work on controls. So really, by rights, when we go to site, we shouldn't be seeing any failures on hearing protection, because you've had the entirety of my lifetime to sort that out, and we are still seeing failures. So, okay, it's the bottom of the hierarchy, but if it's not working, you're feeling a disaster. That's why we're looking at it. We're starting there. We're starting there because it gives us an indicator. It's a really simple visual prompt for our inspectors to say, if they walk onto a site, if they see people wearing hearing protection or they see it in stock, then they can ask questions about workplace noise. And it's a simple prompt for anybody who's given advice on occupational health. If you walk into a place and there's hearing protection available or in use, start asking questions about what they're doing for their noise.
Yeah, so this conversation starts. We've got a couple of questions coming through. So Laura's asked about the health surveillance point and around the fact that I think some of the information you gave was that health surveillance wasn't effective, or there was notices on given on health surveillance. And Laura's just asking, is that the fact that they weren't doing it, so there's no health surveillance in place, or that it was ineffective or wasn't appropriate health surveillance? So
yeah. So the ineffective health surveillance, it was so I've not broken down the information on that because that's more Susan Donnelly's sort of thing. But it was a broad range of issues. So everything from you're supposed to have it and you don't have it, to you've got it, but it's, you're not giving it to everybody who's supposed to be getting it, through to the health surveillance provider is not doing a particularly effective job. And yes, I think our question there about conducting audio screening, and that not being fit for purpose. We've seen everything across the entire gambit, from just not there to being there but not in a suitable and sufficient manner. So I know Susan Donnelly and the occupational health team are looking at these things, and they've got a lot more information on this, and they could probably give you chapter and verse on how that breaks down. I suspect that Susan and Steve Foreman may be doing some presentations at some occupational health events where they can give you a lot more detail on that type of thing. I could get it, but I don't have it just now. So.
And Susan's coming along to the conference in November as well, so I'll ask her specifically to cover some of that. Another question on the over attenuation, the audibility issues, and how inspectors, did they just ask the question, or was there any more detail that was asked around judging? So
yeah, the question there about how our inspectors establishing if the hearing protection was correctly specified in order to avoid over attenuation. So the question that they're asking is, well, have you checked? You've got warning signals. Have you checked to see if you've done that? If you've actually tested it in some meaningful way. Now, the obvious thing that would come back was, well, how am I supposed to do that? that there is an ISO standard for it. There is an international standard that shows you how to do it. It's got a lot of, it's got one section in it which is quite complex. It involves noise measurements and background noise measurements and all sorts of things. But actually the simplest way to do it is just to get them to put their hearing protection on and set off an alarm to see whether they can hear it, or do the shout test to see if they can hear the call. And if the majority of your staff are able to hear that type of thing, then that's enough. It doesn't have to be a super complex, super involved process. It just has to be, right, okay, we know that it's important that you hear this machine when it starts to make this noise. That sometimes can be the thing that's the warning that something's happening with that machine. And it would be simply the case that you put the hearing protection on and try to replicate that. So whether it's a fire alarm that you test, or whether it's a shout test so that someone knows not to switch something on, or whatever method you're using for your warning, you just do that. But in terms of what the inspectors are asking, they're asking, have you done it? And usually they're met with a sort of blank expression, and they've never thought of that. And it is actually a requirement of the regulations. It's in there. It's a specific requirement of the regulations.
Okay, and there's quite an interesting question from Alex. I don't know if you can come on to ask it, or if you want to just pick that up, Chris.
What's he saying? A very, very common past observation is that businesses tend to engage in activities for noise control, often on an episodic basis, rather than developing a form of noise management control program. Businesses programs typically perform better than businesses that may hold an assessment engagement. Yes, that is a good question, because we are actually, when we're going out and doing our visits, there's sort of 3 levels of things that we're asking the inspectors to do. One is the enforcement thing, so just now that's around about hearing protection. The second thing is advice, and the advice that they're giving is, have you got a very simple list of noise controls that you're working on? Do you have that? Have you got a list of things that what I've done already, what I'm going to be doing in the short term, what I'm going to be doing in the medium term, what I'm going to be doing in the long term? And the reason why we're advising on that is that the long-term intention for HSE is to come back at a later date and say, the last time we were here, we asked you to do effectively what Alex is suggesting, that you got a noise management and control program, and we want to see that you've made some progress against it. Have you ticked off some of the things that you said you were going to do? But yes, absolutely, we're advising that companies do that in this phase, and my expectation is that we will be potentially enforcing on those noise management programs in later phases. Shall I just read out the next questions? I've got one here from Matt Richard. He says, what is HSE's view on autoacoustic emissions in place of the standard pure tone health surveillance? We don't have a position at the moment, but our position currently is that we've got guidance, and that you follow the guidance when it comes to hearing testing. I've said this to a few manufacturers, whether they're producing electronic monitoring equipment or hearing testing equipment, whatever it happens to be. If you're going to suggest something which is different to what's in the guidance, that's okay, because it is guidance. It's not a regulation. This is how we would expect somebody to do something. If you're going to make the decision that you're going to use something that isn't in the HSE guidance, then you have to be able to demonstrate that your process is as good, if not better, than what is being used as the current expected method. So if someone was going to use autoacoustic emissions, then they would need to go through all the process of demonstrating that it's as good, if not better, and have that information. So I personally don't have an opinion on it, because it's not something that I'm looking at. I know that there are other people within my group, so people like Rachel Van Bissau has got a much clearer sort of information on what her thoughts are on it, but also on the sort of the pros and cons of these types of things. But and it is something that we kind of look at and see what's the position on that. But the thing that people kind of tend to forget is that, HSE, we try to set goals. We're not prescriptive about what is done, but similarly, all legislation slightly lags behind where industry is and where technology is. So there are opportunities for people to come up with new ways of doing things, but we really want them to be able to demonstrate fully and in a lot of detail that it's as good, if not better. And also, the other thing that you have to be aware of is that any changes to the guidance that we put forward to government, any changes to the regulations that we put forward to the government, significant changes, it has to go through a costing process. And if something's going to be a significant cost to industry or a significant change in the cost to industry, then that has to go through quite a significant civil service review, because we don't really want to burden industry if they've got something that already works. Right, I'm going to go to the next one, which is, I think, from Gordon.
Yeah,
Thanks, Chris, for your summary. Please, can you comment on the involvement of environmental health officers' roles and future collaboration with HSE's noise enforcement programme or local authority inspectors to reduce non-compliance? So, at the moment, we've got very limited involvement with environmental health officers on workplace noise. I mean, my expectation is that the vast majority of them would be pretty good at this, because most of them have got a pretty solid basis in noise through all the environmental noise issues that they deal with. What we have done recently for environmental health officers, we've got an environmental health, or we've got a local authority team within HSE, and I've produced some short training videos for them, which is specifically around these inspection campaigns. And they've also, through that Vimeo video page that they have access to, that they can get access to from HSE, they've also got access to shorter videos and all the shorter training videos that we give to inspectors. So we're not specifically saying out to any local authority, can you do this or do that around about workplace noise. But if they want to do stuff, there is material available, and if they're interested in getting involved, then we would encourage them to do so, and I'm happy to speak to them. But I'm also aware that local authorities are under quite a lot of pressure financially, and there's quite a significant reduction in number of environmental health officers over the last few years. So I think the chances that they have the spare capacity to do this is probably a bit limited, but certainly training materials there for them. If anybody is an EHO and you're interested in it, my contact details are there, so give me a call.
I mean, and interestingly as well, thinking about that kind of noise exposure profile, I know a lot of the noisy workplaces now, or people who complain about noisy workplaces, are talking about places like leisure centres, gyms, swimming pools, noisy cafes with these, coffee machines and the metal on metal impact noises that can be created and bounce around those kind of workplaces, which all fall under the remit of the EHO enforcement, local authority enforced areas. So we don't really know enough about the noise exposure profile, but the instinct is, there's some high noise exposures in some of these workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we kind of we're a bit of between two sort of stools with this, because we are, HSE is the sort of the holder of the guidance for a lot of workplaces that we don't actually regulate on. So we issue a lot of guidance, or have issued a lot of guidance on entertainment noise, even though for the vast majority of these spaces we are not the first regulator or the initial regulator of choice. But certainly, if anybody environmental health is interested in this and wants to do some work on it, then I'm more than happy to speak to them.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Chris, again. Always really useful and insightful and helpful information. Thanks to everybody for joining us, for your interest and attention. Do keep in touch. You've got Chris's contact details there, and a lot of people know me or can get in touch with me. I'm happy for that as well. And hopefully catch up with you all soon and see some of you at the conference in November. So thanks again, Chris. Thanks, Lee, BOHS, and everybody. And see you all soon.